Workers are doing too well. Called the Fed to shut that down. Jon Stewart interviews Treasury Secretary Larry Summers.
We had huge levels of demand, and those huge levels of demand kept pushing up prices and pushing up wages. But ultimately, it was you put too much water in the bathtub overflows. You put too much demand into the economy, and you get high and rising prices.
But the San Francisco Fed says that is demand is maybe 30 to 35% of the inflation. Wages are really around 20% of the inflation. There's a huge corporate profit aspect to it. There's a huge supply chain aspect to it. But our method for controlling it seems really much more focused on wages and employment.
There's certain sicknesses you can have where there's a drug and it has side effects. Everybody hates the side effects, and no doctor wants their patient to suffer the side effects. But if you don't address the sickness, you're gonna have a bigger problem down the road.
It's like breaking your arm, and then instead of putting it in a fucking cast, you just cut the arm off because you're like, well, the bone's broken anyway. What kind of a fucking analogy is this, dog? Like, inflation, for the most part, is still absolutely caused by profit-seeking ghouls. But the reality is, there is no price controls that you can implement because that would be communism. There is no deflationary mechanism that you can implement through the legislative body in the form of taxes because that would be communism. So the only thing they have is cutting the fucking arm off. That's it. That's what they're doing. They're slowly cutting finger by finger, maybe the hand next, to try to put a stop to this by way of diminishing worker power that workers gained during COVID.
CEO pay has gone up 1,500%. Workers' wages haven't gone up at all. I think you're misdiagnosing the sickness.
First, John, inequality is a terrible thing. Question, though, is it an issue that somebody whose control is over setting interest rates and printing money can do much about? Now, you could say that they shouldn't have responded to the 2009 recession by cutting money.
Yes.
By cutting interest rates. You could say that.
Yes,
but
you could.
Do you really think, and certainly that wasn't what progressives were saying at that time.
It doesn't matter.
At that time, progressives were saying, we need lower interest rates so people can borrow money to buy houses and put people to work.
But they were lower.
Quantitative easing has to stop at some point, and I do understand why you would have to increase interest rates. So I don't even think that that is like legitimate problem. It's just that when you do that as the only deflationary mechanism without actually addressing the root cause, because that creates unique issues in and of itself. The problem is the money supply is only going to those at the tippy top anyway. It's not like they're doing modern monetary theory, chat, printing an unlimited amount of money and like doing it to fund social programs. It's just helping prop up new bubbles like the tech bubble, like we've seen, okay, which is part of the reason why we're seeing the tech bubble suffer so aggressively now. The problem is there are many actual deflationary mechanisms that the government has no problem, or the government has no power to implement. So the interest rates conversation, in my opinion, is like entirely separate.
It for car at the corporate level, where they just put the money in the hands of the bankers and say, you decide. This pandemic was the first time the government, in my opinion, did the thing that they're supposed to do in a crisis. When you look at the stimulus payments that went out, 70% of it was being used for rent and food. And if you look at the recovery in the pandemic versus the recovery from 2008, when you stimulated the economy at the demand level, jobs had plunged in the pandemic, and then they shot back up. The recovery in 2009 was painstaking, but the stock market did great. So our fiscal policy and our monetary policy has always been on the side of corporate easing.
Just so we're clear, if you talk to African-American voters, if you talk to Hispanic voters, talk to voters who don't have college degrees, they regard the country's biggest problem as having to do with inflation. Mm-hmm. So while you may see this as having been tremendously successful, our fellow Americans who don't live as comfortably.
Dude, neoliberalism is so disgusting. It's so cynical. Like, this demon is like, yeah, talk to some black voters. They love that we're increasing interest rates. They love it. It's like, dude, shut the fuck up, bro. What do you mean? He tried to turn this into like, it's only white people that are upset. God, I've never been so conflicted because on the one hand, I'm like, I understand why you would increase interest rates, okay? But also on the other hand, like, this has nothing to do with what the fuck he's talking about. In the United States of America, gains are privatized, losses are socialized, okay?
Everyone's paying more for gas and groceries, and that's really hard. So here's what we're gonna do. We're gonna throw 10 million of them out of work so that we all don't have to share that burden. Why aren't we attacking corporate profit in any way? Because that's been estimated to be 30% of inflation, 40% of inflation.
I don't think it's a tenable view that all of a sudden corporations became greedy. Of course there's monopolies in the economy.
No, you fucking demon. They've always been that way. What the fuck? Ah! That's insane. Go ask that very same group of individuals if you were in a proximity of one. But if you go ask those very same black people, brown people, Mexican people, Latino people, whatever, whether they think corporate greed is a fucking major problem in America. If you're gonna act like, you're doing this for black people, go ask them that. Wonder what their perspective on that is. That's awesome. He's like, what? Corporate greed didn't just grow out of nowhere. Yeah, you're right. It didn't. It's been growing. Non-fucking stop, asshole.
John, and we should be for
they've been
much
bragging
more
about
aggressive,
it on
much
their
more
earnings
aggressive
calls.
than we were.
They're on their earnings calls, they're saying our profits have never been higher. We're killing it. The markups during the pandemic are sometimes they're saying 70% of what they were.
If there was a huge increase in the demand for shrewd television commentary, I imagine the demand for what you do would go way up. And I imagine you'd convert that into higher wages and getting more and getting paid better.
You're saying it's the market at work.
I don't think you'd call yourself a gouger when you...
I would absolutely call myself a gouger.
When you did that.
And by the way, the effect of the talk show business is very different than the effect of ExxonMobil, right? I mean, let's be fair.
Isn't this show going to be on Apple TV?
Correct.
And I think Apple TV is worth about 5 times as much as Exxon. I think Apple's price, since the stimulus began, Apple's value has gone up by about $1.2 trillion.
Yeah, bro, because you're talking to Tim Apple. This guy, this demon, doing the same debate tactics that motherfuckers do to me when they're like, well, you work for Amazon. Bitch, so do you. There is no avoiding fucking working for a demonic monopoly in this country. They designed it so that you can't get away with it. There are not that many singular individuals with like a lot of power. He's one of them. Like, it blows my mind that like anyone that fucking, and anyone and everyone is just like, wow, like this is a good argument. Like anyone that looks at this and goes, that's a good argument, needs to be fucking lobotomized.
Right.
That's $4,000 for every American, just an increase in the value of Apple.
You just made my point for me.
Do you feel that Apple is somehow gouging or doing something wrong?
Yes, of course. And Exxon is, and Mobil is.
So let's talk about Apple. Let's talk about Apple. Do you think Apple should just sell phones for less and not have enough phones? What would you have Apple do?
You're saying to me, John, market force.
You think Apple should just sell phones for cheaper? Yes. It's so funny. He was not expecting him to say yes to Apple because he's like, he himself is such a corporate dog. Obviously, that's why he's in the position that he's in, and a corporate master at the same time, simultaneously. That like he assumes that every other person that he's talking to is going to also be like, oh no, please, no, oh no, Apple phones, their prices should not be changing. Oh my God.
Do you think Apple should just sell phones for less and not have enough phones? What would you have Apple do?
You're saying to me, John, market forces are market forces. And if demand goes up, are you suggesting, young man, that Apple should charge less than they could charge? Let me flip that on you. When there's a tightness in the labor market, what you're saying is the workers shouldn't do the same. That the workers, just following the same capitalistic principles that allow Apple to charge more for their phones, shouldn't charge more because wage inflation.
Meanwhile, they never fucking hit the profit center. Yeah. No, that's it. The only thing that they're there to defend is the fucking profit center. That's it. Profit margin. It's obvious. That's it. He's right. Jon Stewart is absolutely correct with this.
Is driving inflation.
That's not at all what I'm saying, John.
That's exactly what you're saying.
Actually, it isn't. Every worker should get as high a wage as they can. It would be a terrible idea.
But the
to try to
Fed is
restrict
going to intervene. The Fed is going to intervene to make that not possible.
No, the Fed is intervening to control the overall level of demand growth.
And what will that do to? And what will that do to the labor market?
Much faster.
What will that do to the labor market? What will it do to the labor market? It will loosen
is likely to lead
to looser labor markets.
A somewhat looser labor market.
Exactly.
We hope to minimize that consequence.
Until we decide to hit the profit center as the main reason for why prices are going up, we will never be able to solve any of these issues.